Mike, I think we can make a start when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Namu, and good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Moore, and I'm chair of Cambridge University Hospitals Foundation Trust. And in that capacity, I very much welcome everybody to the 2023 annual public meeting. Most of my colleagues on the board are here tonight, as is Neil Stutchbury, who's our lead governor. So between us, I hope and look forward to a good conversation and your questions and that you've submitted already and that you'll submit during the course of today. Through the evening, we'll hear about developments across the hospitals over the past year and also looking forward to the year and beyond ahead of us. Thank you to those of you who have already submitted questions, and we will hopefully address those questions in the latter part of the meeting. But those of you who are here today can also continue to submit questions prompted by what you hear or issues that are on your mind. And we'll endeavour to answer those questions in the course of the meeting. But if we run out of time, we will be closing at 6:30. If we do run out of time, we will respond to you separately outside of the meeting, as we will keep a record of those questions as submitted on chat. So please submit any questions you have on chat in the facility we have on the video. At the meeting, we are also receiving part of our constitutional requirement is to present the annual report and accounts for 2022-23, and these are as on our website. That's a formal part of tonight's agenda. The annual report and accounts were approved by the Board of Directors earlier on in the year in June of 2023 and have been, as I say, been published on the Trust website following being laid in Parliament. But this is an opportunity too, if you have any questions on those accounts, to so raise them. I'm glad to say, and my thanks to Mike CUH, who's our CFO, and Daniel, who's the chair of our audit committee, for all the work that was done in ensuring that that was a clean audit. So that is very good news, given the circumstances of the NHS at the present time. We will hear shortly from Neil, who's our lead governor, and thereafter by Roland, who's our chief executive. And as I say, there will be opportunities after they've finished to raise questions as prompted by what they've said, and the questions that you have already asked us. Just before I hand over to in the first place, Neil, the reason this is important is that we recognise as a foundation trust that we are accountable to the public. And as a board, we take very seriously the responsibility we have that you should feel assured of safe, high quality clinical and health services from CUH. And we take that very seriously. And we take, in addition to that, seriously the idea that your input to the quality of that care is fundamental to its being continuously improved. So we welcome your scrutiny, your challenge, your questioning, and your interest as fundamental to our mission. I think we all recognise that within the National Health Service at the moment, we are at a very important moment. It's customary and routine to say in meetings of this sort, certainly over the last few years, to say that we have had challenges, and we have. It's customary and routine to say that we do and continue to do great things, and we do. And it's also customary to say in meetings of this sort that we have fantastic future opportunities, and we believe that we have those too. But we should reflect, I think, and recognise that this is a very important moment for the NHS at the present time. We know that we have seen unprecedented levels of waiting lists, or certainly in recent memory, waiting lists as we've emerged from COVID, and that we know creates patient anxiety and patient concern, and it concerns a serious amount of interest by the board in ensuring that patient quality and patient safety is uppermost in the way we think and work our way through that. We know that there is considerable worry by members of staff in regard to their capability and capacity with the available resources to deliver that safe care. And again, that is uppermost in our minds, since without our staff, we wouldn't be able to provide anything at all. And whilst enormously proud of our colleagues, all 15,000 across the hospital, and enormously proud of what they do day in, day out, we do know that for many of them, it's a very tough set of days that they have in delivering satisfactory and safe healthcare. And we know also that the public anxiety in regard to very national tragedies and scandals will have raised questions about safety in hospitals, quite rightly so, and a lot of media attention, again, quite rightly so. And I want to say to you that as a board, we are in no way complacent about the moment that we're in. I treat the being a member of the board as Adam Brooks as a very primary responsibility of stewardship for the safe conduct of an institution and its services, which matter so much to so many people. And it's our role as members of the board to see us through this very challenging moment. But none of us, I think, are underestimating what the period of time we're now in is like, all the anxieties that causes. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Neil in a second, just to check that there aren't any questions so far on the accounts, but if there are, please just raise them as we go through the latter part of the meeting. Over to you, Neil.
Thanks very much, Mike. Just by way of introduction, I'm Neil Stotchbury. I was elected as a patient governor back in 2017, and then became lead governor in 2021. I've become very passionate about being a patient voice in all aspects of the hospital's operation, because just as Mike said, it is so very important to us. As well as being lead governor, I also co-chair the patient advisory group for the new cancer hospital. I'm a member of a couple of patient and public involvement panels for medical research and chair a regional PPI forum. I'm also a member of the MyChart stakeholder group with 3 other patient representatives. I'm going to cover a couple of things this evening. First is what governors have been doing this year and how we do it, and also just a few of the areas where we have been particularly focused on this year. Next slide, please, Namu. So just a quick reminder of what governors do. So governors are elected by you, the members, in order to represent you in the hospital. And our job is to assure ourselves that things are being done right and proper for all patients. And we do that by holding the non-exec directors to account for the performance of the board. And we do that through a number of different ways, and a few are listed here. So we can observe public board meetings. We can observe board assurance meetings, such as the performance committee or the audit committee, for example. We have regular quarterly meetings with non-exec directors and members of the exec to get into more in-depth discussions about certain issues. And we also have some seminars. So these seminars are very useful for sort of getting to know a bit more about what's going on in the hospital. So this year, for example, we've had seminars on the medical research process, on looking at the staff survey results, the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, comms and engagement strategy, and so forth. The other thing that we've been doing this year is trying to promote the benefits of becoming a member, and to try and increase the number of members we have, and also to encourage people who are members to get more involved in the goings on at the hospital. So we've made with the help of comms and media department, we've made a video to try and explain the benefits of membership that features a couple of members, also myself and Mike also speaking on that. That's on the website if you want to see it. We've revamped our monthly newsletters. In fact, if you've seen your email recently, we've just issued one this afternoon, the latest one. And we've also updated the members' website itself. We hold events such as listening exercises. There's one on cancer care a few weeks ago. We have regular lectures called Medicine for Members, which I'm sure you've attended. They're really excellent. And you can also yourself come and visit the hospital and inspect wards through our place and 15 steps processes. So I would encourage you to get involved by doing some of those things. Recently, for example, we had a session on redesigning the concourse area in the main hospital near M&S and Costa, and many people got involved in the survey and joined in the listening exercise on that. So those are some of the things that we've been busy with. The other things that have happened this year, we've had our annual governor elections. As a result of that, 3 governors, that's Jane Biddle, Karina Tyrrell and myself, were re-elected. 4 new governors have joined the Council of Governors, Robin Stevens and Elizabeth Howe, patient governors, Chris Cumberland, public governor, and Frank Allen, a staff governor. We've also got a new partnership governor appointed by the County Council, that's Susan van der Ven, and also Prof. John Clarkson has returned from his sabbatical and rejoined the Council of Governors. We'd like to thank Prof. Dame Carol Black for standing in for him throughout his sabbatical. And finally, we've also been busy doing a recruitment exercise to replace Adrian Chamberlain, one of our non-exec directors, who's done a fantastic job chairing our performance committee and championing issues such as productivity, financial rigor, and digital technology. More about that in the next month or 2. Next slide, please. So I'd just like now just to cover a few of the areas that governors have been particularly engaged in this year, and I think this list will not surprise you at all. So you'll all know that the pressure on the hospital hasn't seemed to have relented at all since the pandemic. In some ways, it's got worse. And indeed, this year we've had the additional challenge of industrial action. We've had 36 days of industrial action since the beginning of this year, and this has had a big impact on both the attention of management but also patient experience as well. So we've sought assurance at our Council of Governors meetings and discussions with non-exec directors that lessons from each round of industrial action have been learnt and applied correctly, and that the right priorities have been taken to ensure that the impact on patient care and patient safety is minimised. And I can assure you, from what we've heard, that the exec and the staff have done an extraordinary job in handling the disruption caused by the strikes. Secondly, on patient safety, at our most recent governor meeting, we sought assurance on a couple of the cases that have been in the news recently. And in fact, these have been the subject of questions that you've got later, so a bit more detail on this. That is of Lucy Letby and also of Martha Mills. And in the Lucy Letby case, we've asked for assurance that this won't happen in CUH. And while no absolute guarantees can be given that it won't happen here, we are satisfied that the culture that we have in CUH and the arrangements to help staff speak up means that it would be extremely unlikely. We've also questioned the sepsis protocols and the rights of patients to seek a second opinion in the light of the tragic case of Martha Mills, who died of septic shock after injuring herself on a tragic bike accident. Both these cases have prompted questions from you, which will be answered in a moment. We've also asked questions about other issues such as hospital-acquired pressure ulcers, falls, and other preventable safety issues. Thirdly, maternity. We've continued to assure ourselves last year and through this year on the safety and experience of women giving birth at the Rosie. This follows the Ockenden report, which was a report on failures in Shrewsbury and Telford issued last year. And one of the big issues we had was around staffing levels. That has been largely resolved already through a big recruitment campaign. But a recent CQC inspection, which gave a rating of needs improvement, shows that there is still more to do in this area, and no doubt we will continue to seek assurance on safety of the maternity service. Fourthly, staff, wellbeing and recruitment. We have 4 very proactive staff governors who do a fantastic job in representing staff in hospital. Staff wellbeing is a real concern for all governors, staff governors, patient governors and public governors. As we all know as patients, our experience in hospital can be influenced by the quality and motivation of the staff caring for us. And the pressure on the hospital and its impact on staff was reflected in the staff survey results that we saw earlier this year, which were down in all areas. Though it has to be said that was a pattern across the whole of the NHS. On integrated care, this is a relatively kind of new area. You may well be aware that the way healthcare is being organised across England now is done through integrated care systems, which are regional organisations which are encouraging close partnership between all providers of healthcare to provide an integrated pathway for patients. So the benefit of this is that patients should get a much more smoother and more integrated journey from their GP to hospital and back into the community. And if it works, you should get to see your GP quicker. You should have a shorter wait in ED, and you should have more choice in your care once you're out of the hospital. Governors are meeting the chair of the Cambridge and Peterborough Integrated Care Board, that's John O'Brien, and the managing director of South Place, which is Heather Noble, next month. And we're going to find out a lot more about progress in developing and delivering the integrated care strategy. So all of these issues are really complex and not easy fixes. And I think that they're likely to be high in our priority next year. So I hope that's given you an overall of the work that we governors have been up to this year. So in summary, we've got a hospital that's under immense pressure, but it's well led and staffed by a great team of people, all motivated to give the best care possible to patients. Can I encourage you all to get involved with the hospital whenever you can? Apply to be a volunteer, join a patient group, do a place visit, or join in one of our listening exercises. Together we can ensure people living in and around Cambridge get the best possible care at Addenbrooke's and the Rosie. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for that as your lead governor's report. And I can see that you've had thank yous conveyed in the chat from someone who I think knows what being a lead governor is like, Richard, who I think, if it's the right Richard, I hope it is, was the lead governor at Royal Papworth for a while. So Rich, and I know has had volunteering experience both in CUH as well. So Richard, I think, gives a knowledgeable gratitude to you, Neil, for what you and the governing body do. I will pass on, if I may, to Roland, who will then give a presentation, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions of what Neil has said. So if you want to take the opportunity of formulating in your own mind any questions that are prompted by Neil's presentation, and we've got some questions beginning to come in the chat that will reflect in the discussions after Roland has spoken. So over to you, Roland, as Chief Executive.
Great, thank you very much, Mike, and thank you, Neil. So 4 areas I'm going to cover over the next 10 minutes or so. First of all, I'd like to talk about one of the patients we're looking after at the moment. I'd then like to set out some of the highlights and achievements of the last year, then talk about some of the challenges we're facing, and then lastly, offer a bit of a view of what the future looks like in terms of the 3 parts of our strategy. So Namu, if we could kindly go to the next slide. So we could have talked about all sorts of different people we're looking after at the moment, and we could have talked about some of the people who are waiting to come in for care. But I just wanted to pause for a moment and talk about Thea Towell, who's a patient we're looking after in our cancer team at the moment. So Thea was losing weight, was quite anxious about this, went to see her local GP, and quite quickly was referred to Addenbrooke's, where we diagnosed a tumour in her stomach that had also spread to her liver, which was a very upsetting and worrying diagnosis for her. And quite quickly, somebody called Dr. Elizabeth Smythe engaged very closely with Thea and moved her into a clinical trial. We offer a very wide range of clinical trials here, from what I would call conventional chemotherapy through to some of the trials relating to the functioning of the immune system. And we were delighted collectively that Thea joined that trial and were able to look after her, bringing together the very best of our partners on the Cambridge Biomedical campus from the University of Cambridge, our industry partners, people like AstraZeneca, and then obviously the National Health Service, ranging from that GP who first met Thea herself, and then the treating team within the hospital. And I think this sense of collaboration and partnership with patients and that wide range of different experts across the health and care system and life sciences ecosystem is really central to how we move through this challenging period to continue to deliver terrific care for our patients. Now, if we could go on to the next slide, that would be great. So in terms of the last year, holding Thea and Elizabeth in our mind, all of the achievements and developments here at CUH and with our partners rely on absolutely terrific people. And they rely on people who are reaching out to find solutions to challenging problems and people who don't give up. And I could talk for the next hour and a half about these 6 or 7 photographs. They're 6 or 7 stories, and there are 600 or 700 of these across our organisation. But if I was just to pick 3, if you go to the photo mark number 6, and you can see one of our nursing team with a screen just behind her, and there's one of our smallest patients just under her hands, and Sue Broster is our Board Director of Improvement, Transformation and Digital with a day job in the neonatal intensive care unit. You'll know this service well. This is the development of a service called LOCANTS, LOCANTS, and it's really a story of how across the Eastern region we're able to look after patients, our smallest patients, babies, without them having to travel to Cambridge. And we're able to use remote technology to hear from the expertise of the treating team in that small hospital in Norfolk or Suffolk, or large hospital in Norfolk, what they're facing into and where they need support and expertise, and then provide very detailed assessment of the patient and improve the treatment for that smallest of the people we're here to look after. And that's a service that's gone live this year, and I think is very much a signal of the direction of travel as we look to serve the whole of our population of the Eastern region to the very best and high standards. So that's photo number 6. Photo number 4, Neil, you alluded to this, and a big thank you to Rohan, David Werrett, our workforce director, Claire, for the quite detailed and focused staff listening events that we've carried out over the course of the summer, to really hear from staff where things are going really well within Addenbrooke's and the Rosie, and where we need to make improvements. And we're getting much more nuanced and detailed assessments of what's in our control, and what do we need to do more on. So we continue to have an enormous challenge around inclusion, and we have to lean into that in a different way. But the focus on keeping people safe and healthy and feeling safe and healthy remains absolutely central to what we're doing to support our staff. And then thirdly, photograph number 7, no presentation will be complete without a building site. I'd love to ask people if they know what this is, but I won't. So this is the Cambridge Movement Surgical Hub, which is a 40-bedded unit with 3 operating theatres attached to it, which will open a week on Friday and will be providing elective orthopaedic care, that's planned joint replacements in effect, for 70 patients a week. And if you want to know where the waiting list sits, in part for us, it sits in people who are waiting to come in for this sort of care. And this programme here is being driven by an extraordinary range of people across the hospital, from our capital and estates and facilities team. Karen, it's great to see you here today. Mike, our finance colleagues, who are also carrying out the procurement exercise. And then obviously the patients and the clinical teams who've been thinking about how to make this facility work in a way that's incredibly efficient and also kind and compassionate for the people who will be treating there. I'd say this is the facility that we commissioned originally as surge capacity for COVID in the spring of 2020, in the dark days of wave 1 of the COVID pandemic. And we've moved heaven and earth to convert it into this elective orthopaedic centre. It could have sat idle and mothballed. We've pushed ahead and we've made it something that will be terrific for our patients. So those are 3 highlights for you, and I'll reluctantly move on from the highlights to the challenges, Namu, on the next page, if that's okay. Great, thank you. So in terms of the challenges, I think, as we've heard from both Mike and Neil, we're in a sort of environment, aren't we, where there's an enormous amount of negative commentary around where the National Health Service is, where public services sit. And there are some very real spikes within that are cause for anxiety, of which, Neil, I think you've given a very good description. Let be, Martha, we could go on to sexual harassment in surgery and crumbling buildings and on and on and on. And I think within that, what you've just heard are examples of where we're pushing ahead, led by outstanding people to do good things. But in that context, there are 5 listed here, but I'll really highlight them as 4 areas of challenge that we're focusing on. And Neil, without any collaboration, we've landed on roughly the same set, which is an encouraging sign of good governance. So the first is patients waiting longer than we would like for care. So if we look at our peers and our absolute performance, waits for cancer care are in a strong position, and waits for elective care, for planned surgery, for elements of outpatients, are broadly flat and would be in a much better position if it wasn't for industrial action. The areas that we've or the area where we have a real issue and challenge is waits in the emergency department. Ambulance handover is very strong, but waits in the department are not where we need them to be. Second area of challenge relates to industrial action. And again, Neil, you've highlighted this. I think for the purposes of this meeting, it's important to distinguish between the irritating cancellation, loss of a couple of days of activity. It seems quite small. What's missed in all of this, I think, are 2 things. The first is the 3 or 4 weeks that sit on either side of that 2 or 3 day period of industrial action, where we're having to call patients and engage with them around whether their services are going to be available on the day. And then we have to restart services after the industrial action. So every time you hear strike or industrial action, don't think 1 or 2 days. We need to think 3 or 4 weeks. And beyond that, the scarring that is now developing within the NHS between different staff groups, as some people take industrial action and some don't, which will take a lot longer to heal in the future. And really, industrial action is a much bigger deal than I think is widely acknowledged at the moment. Thirdly, I've already talked about the emergency department, so I won't cover that again. You're right, Neil, we'd had 7 years of steady upward trajectory on the staff survey, and we have dipped this year along with the national picture. We've just dipped a little bit more than we would have liked on that, not in a way that's catastrophic, but in a way that we need to pay real attention and really understand what's going on, and then have a cool and measured response to what we're going to do to respond. And then lastly, the maternity CQC report. This is a very thorough and robust report, and I would encourage anybody who wants to see the CQC at their best to read the report. It's about 30 pages. It's available online. Areas of real strength in the organisation, a very strong service. 2 areas of particular challenge. One is the medical model, so the model for doctors providing maternity care, and then the series of relatively small things that we should fix and should be able to fix. And you'll probably be able to see, I feel we should have got those smaller things over the line. But I think Sharon, Lorraine, Ashley, there was nothing in the report that we didn't know about, which isn't to say that's a good thing, but it's reassuring that there were no surprises. If we go on to the next slide, Namu. So if that's the good, those are the areas of challenge, what's the plan ahead? So we've got a 3-part strategy. You can see at the bottom there: improving patient care, supporting staff, and building for the future. Just so you know, there are 5 programs of work underneath each one of those, which have got very detailed plans against them to make sure we deliver them. And those are reviewed by the Council of Governors and by the board, and indeed shaped by both, and are heavily shaped by patients and our partners as well. And if I just give you some a flavour of what we're doing in each of those, if you were to go to the next page, Namu, on improving patient care. So on improving patient care, I'd start with the bottom. I think a real move to listening to patients and hearing where we're doing well, where we're not, and how patients can shape what we're doing. And Neil, you've talked about the Cancer Hospital as an example. Lorraine and Sharon, you could be talking about the inpatient survey, the results of which we're considering at the moment, where we've got work to do around hospital at night, where we're a bit noisy. So I could go on. That's the absolute centerpiece. And then the sorts of things that we're looking at are new innovations. I've talked about Lockants that you can see there, looking after our smallest patients across the region, but also a real push on things like virtual wards, which is not discharging people just to home. It's a ward environment, but it's at home. And then new developments on the site to give more capacity and enable us to treat patients coming through our emergency department. And what you can see in the middle there is continued work with our partners outside of the hospital to make sure that we're doing all we can to avoid people coming to hospital unless they need to, and then getting them home as quickly as possible. I would just say on that last point, this is a very human and often upsetting area for us to work in. I was in our discharge lounge 2 weeks ago with an elderly lady with a name beginning with M, and she'd had a fall in a bungalow 4 weeks previous to me having a chat with her, and she was going to be going home to a nursing home, not to her bungalow, and we were arranging for services to take her back there, but she wasn't sure which village she was going to be going back to and what that was going to be like for her. And she'd come into us with a fall. And I just think it's important for us all to remember, when we talk about discharging people, we're talking about that lady who could be our mother, grandmother, sister. And that's exactly the sort of thing we're trying to think about, is how can we provide the right kind care to smoothly transition somebody into the place where they can be best looked after. If we come on to the next slide, Namu, on supporting our staff. As I've said, absolutely central to all that we do is listening to our staff, hearing where they think we can make improvements and where we need to develop. At times we need to have quite challenging and clear conversations about things we believe we can do and should do, and things that we shouldn't. And those are always, I think, quite robust, but it's important to be straightforward. Big areas I think we're focusing on at the moment. So you can see in the second bullet point there, focusing very hard on the good work agenda. David and Karen working here, making additional accommodation available for new joiners, the subsidy for hot food and available of cheaper options for colleagues, subsidy for transport for people coming into the organisation, as well as ongoing psychological support for people who are in difficulty. I think the central bullet there, this huge focus on recruitment and retention. We're seeing a real spike at the moment in terms of sickness absence, and how are we tackling that and leaning into it to understand it, as well as just recruiting. And that's in a context of the cost of living challenges and Cambridge being an expensive place to live. And then equality, diversity and inclusion, which remains an area where we're on a kind of plateau, but we're not making the progress that we need to, and we need to accelerate what we're doing there for both staff and for patients, and for making sure we have equity in terms of population health. Okay, and if we then come to the last of my slides, building for the future. So what are we doing about the longer term? And this is all really a build on what I've talked about so far. If I look at this list, the areas I'm sort of most concerned about in terms of the immediate are the work we're doing around equality, diversity, inclusion, and system working for local patients. So I feel at the moment, I wouldn't say that we're flatlining on those, but we're not seeing the same upward trajectory that we are on some of the things that that I'll talk about in a moment. And that doesn't mean we're giving up. It just means we've got to, I think, go back to understanding what we're trying to do and then bring energy to those two areas. I think alongside that, some areas of enormous strength and real progress, I think of which, you know, we're all very proud. So I've already talked about the Cambridge Movement Surgical Hub. I think on the Cancer Research Hospital, and there are questions about this that we'll come to later, it's fantastic that we've got our outline business case approved, and we're moving ahead, full steam ahead there. The major issue for us on the Cancer Research Hospital, is to close the fundraising gap, but we have good work underway there. And then on the Cambridge Children's Hospital, we're a little bit behind, but looking to push that business case over the line for outline business case over the course of the next couple of months. In fact, I think I've got the meeting on Friday morning with a scary organisation or scary government committee called the Joint Investment Committee, which Mike, Claire and I are looking forward to on a Friday morning. Isn't quite what I'd say, but it's an important meeting where we try to get things over the line. Now, the key issue there is a different issue. It's closing 165 million capital gap, which we think we've got down to a manageable level. The counter there is that we are approaching 60% of the fundraising target without actually launching a public campaign. So I think real progress there. And then lastly, it's good to see the developments happening on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, the Cambridge South Railway Station, which is now well underway, 1000 Discovery Drive, which is a new building on the campus. I think all of that has to be seen, though, in the context of how we're working with our local communities and local partners, and has got to be seen in the context of not hoovering everything into Cambridge, but thinking about how we can have a distributed model of care and a distributed model of where our staff sit. And we've got to do that in a way that gets to a Cambridge that's sustainable and a good place to live and to work. Mike, I'll stop there and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Roland. That was very comprehensive, covering a wide range of our interest through the strategic narrative lens. So thank you to everyone for that. So thank you to Neil, thank you to Roland for those oversight, those headlines rather, as to how we what we have got on. So now it's time we move on to questions. I know that we've had some questions as they've come through on chat. And that's great. Please do raise questions. And what I will try to do is to weave the questions that are coming in the meeting itself with those that we'd had pre-sight of before that were given to us in advance. And I'll bring relevant colleagues in to answer them. So I will try and, as I say, weave those in. And please use the chat facility in order to raise the questions. So I'm going to start with some questions which are to do with some of the physical infrastructure of the hospital. And there's a question that we had from Sue Arnold a few days ago, which I'll start with, which is, I think, Namu, I'll read out the questions. Is that right? Yeah. So do any of the older parts of the hospital contain RAC, the aerated concrete that has proven somewhat difficult in both hospitals and school provision, as we've all known over recent weeks and before? And if so, if there is a problem with that in Addenbrooke's, what is the plan to deal with it? And that links in to some degree with a question that Richard had put in the chat earlier, which is to say, is there a concrete problem in the hospital? So, Karen, can I come over to you? And if I can ask colleagues who I bring over to you to please just introduce themselves when they give me the when they answer. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Mike, and good evening. My name is Karen Charlton, and I'm the Director of Capital Estates and Facilities. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Thank you. So the question about reinforced autoclave aerated concrete, as Mike said, there is quite a lot of that in the news at the moment. So we've been working over a period of years to assess the risk associated with rack planks in our organisation. So we have responded to the NHS England requirement for assessment, and we have commissioned structural engineers to undertake assessments, both visual and, where needed, intrusive surveys as well. So the conclusion is that accommodation that we have on site here has a very low risk of rack plank, and that is really good news for us. We continue to work with the superior landlords in off-site properties to get that same assurances. And we know that some other hospitals in our region suffer with rack plank issues, and we continue to work with those organisations. And then Richard's question around the scaffolding, the short answer to that is no. There's some routine maintenance, and lots of the scaffolding you see around at the moment is in relation to roof repairs to deal with the significant downpours that we're seeing. And then some significant scaffolding that's been on our A block for a period of time is quite an extensive refurbishment programme of our oldest clinical building, inpatient building, which is seeing the roof being taken off, new ventilation plant, and refurbishment of 3 operating theatres. And that should still be shrouded in scaffolding for some time until early in the new year.
Thanks, Karen. That's very helpful and reassuring. So again, so your answer was in regard to rack. No, it's been surveyed, and there is not a problem of the sort that we've seen in other hospitals for us, which is good news. However, as Annabelle's question is, what does CUH consider the likely impact to be of the rebuilding of neighbouring rack hospitals, Hinchinbrook, West Suffolk, Queen Elizabeth, and also James Paget in Yarmouth? So I'll hand over to you, Roland, there, because that's more in terms of the contingency arrangements that it would impact on Addenbrooke's if there were to be problems in those rebuilds. And it is fair to say that clearly that is a big risk for us, because those are 4 district general hospitals in our region, which means that the region of the east of England has a disproportionately high incidence of rack hospitals within its acute hospital district general hospital base. But Roland, the impact on us.
Yeah, so a couple of points on this, Mike. It's a really good question. The plans for the redevelopment of all of those hospitals are still at a relatively early stage, but as those develop, we'll need to obviously be involved in, would there need to be any changes to where patients go for their care while those hospitals are rebuilt, and we'll be very actively involved in those plans. In the event of, if you like, a very urgent need to move patients out of those hospitals, again, we're very active in the planning for that in the event that it occurs. I think the really big question for all of us is, given where we are with what patients are telling us about the care that they want to receive and where they want to receive it, it's making sure that we're not just rebuilding like-for-like hospitals, we're building hospitals that can accommodate the way that care is changing and evolving. And again, that's something that we're looking to shape. And again, Lockants is just one example of the sorts of things we're doing to change the way that services are provided. Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Roland. So, Karen, can I come back to you on to the second question? Namu has very helpfully put in the chat all the questions that were pre-submitted, so everybody can have a look at those if you have the facility on your chat at home. But Karen, the second question was in regard to the hospital and the campus, indeed, strategy, which aims to reduce carbon footprint use of water, especially in the new builds. So Karen, can I hand over to you in this clearly vitally important and again very high profile issue, and one that's vitally important to all of us? Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Mike. So our organisation has got a board approved green plan, and it's available on our website. It is a plan, our phase 1 plan runs until 2024. So we've got a comprehensive plan that works across a number of pillars, in particular around water. Yes, we already do many things to conserve water. And although our footprint, our physical footprint and our patient throughput and activity has increased significantly over the period of years, actually our water consumption is fairly steady. So that it demonstrates the work that we already do in existing hospitals. And then in particular for the cancer and the Children's Hospital is reviewing what the opportunities are. Rainwater harvesting for landscaping around the cancer hospital as an example. But unlike domestic premises and other non-clinical facilities, we have got the consideration of vulnerable patients who might have high risk of infection, immunocompromise, and therefore from an infection control perspective and a water quality perspective, there are a limited number of things that we can do. So we continue to work with our infection control colleagues and with our technical specialists around water quality as we move through the next stages of the development. But as a hospital footprint overall, there's already much we're doing to reduce water consumption. Thank you, Mike. Thanks,
Karen. So I'm now going to go over, if everybody's happy for me to move over to question 3 in the pre-submitted questions, and then I'll weave another couple of questions that have come in whilst we've been meeting. And question 3 was, is there a requirement that all teams, capital A, capital L teams, have sepsis training? That again comes in from Sue Arnold, who asked question 1. And I'm going to hand over to Lorraine and or Ashley. So Lorraine is our chief nurse, Ashley our medical director, to come back on that.
Great, thanks, Mike. I think I'm going to take this question. So we have a number of different types of training at CUH. We have mandated training, which means that everyone undertakes it and includes training such as manual handling or basic life support. And we also have essential for role training, which is allocated to individual members of staff depending on where they work and where they're likely to encounter conditions that they'd need to within their clinical practice. Sepsis falls into both of those categories. So for all clinical nursing staff so nursing staff and midwives who work in the clinical areas, they're required to undertake an e-learning training module as part of the essential for role training, and that's undertaken on an annual basis. Staff working within the maternity services undertake sepsis training, which is included in their annual training programme. For non-consultant medical staff, they undergo regular training and assessment, which covers all areas of practice, including what would be sepsis identification and treatment. And consultant medical staff also undertake continuing professional development, which is expected to cover all areas of their practice. And all staff, including the medical staff, can access a standalone sepsis training. And additionally, we have mandated basic life support training, of which sepsis identification and treatment is included within that, and that's what all staff undertake. So it covers both mandated and essential for role.
Thank you, Lorraine. Can I just come over to Sharon, if I may, just to supplement that? Sharon is one of our non-executives on the board. She is the Senior Independent Director as well on behalf of the board. And she chairs our Quality Committee, which is the committee that does the detailed scrutiny on all aspects regarding patient care, the safety of quality of our care. And sepsis has been an issue that we've looked at quite regularly over the years in the Quality Committee, Sharon, because of the concern and the recognising of the criticality of getting that right and the undetected nature of it in some cases. And also perhaps you might want to touch on this issue about training and training uptake, because again, that's something that the Quality Committee has looked at. Sorry to throw those to you unexpectedly, but I mean, but I think I'm right in saying that the Quality Committee has looked at both training across the piece and sepsis at quite regular intervals.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike. So we look, the Quality Committee meets every other month, and we're particularly focused on patient quality, safety and experience. And in every meeting that we meet, we do look at what we call the sepsis metrics. So there are some nationally mandated sepsis metrics that we must meet in terms of how we recognise sepsis, the time in which it takes to get an antibiotic to the patient and to have tests such as culturing the blood to see what's causing sepsis, and other things that septic patients need. And so these kind of metrics are mandated. And so we look at how we are doing in comparison to this national standard and the standard that we've set for ourselves locally. And so we do regularly challenge our executive team on how we are doing. And so sepsis is considered to be very important. And in fact, you know, in what we call our integrated report, looking at those results, it's possible to see how we're doing there. So we're pushing hard on that. The other area for sepsis really is recognising when a patient deteriorates. So when they become quite poorly quite quickly. There is training across the hospital on that, but we also have something that we look at metrics for how we respond to patients who are deteriorating, such as something called the Muse score, and so on. And so we track that in the quality committee over time and see whether we are at the right level of care. In the case of sepsis, I think that over the last year we have had several challenges in terms of the way that we're responding, and we have actually pressed on that. And I can see that in terms of patient outcome, in terms of mortality across our patient population, that actually what's called our standardised mortality ratio is actually better than the national average. So what we can say is that sepsis links to the deteriorating patient, and that this links to poor outcomes in our patients. And we can see that our patient population who come into our hospital for care actually do well. They fare very well compared to the national average. So, Mike, we focus on, I've said quite a lot of technical detail, but to say that we do focus on sepsis very seriously. In terms of training is absolutely fundamental for all of our staff. They get that when they first joined the organisation, and then regularly, as Lorraine has said. And again, we follow those metrics to see whether training is being taken up, and challenge our executive colleagues when we think that there's a gap. So we follow those longitudinally, which is the right thing to do, to see what the trends are in take-up. I think I'll stop there, but happy to answer any other questions. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you. That's very helpful. So if Gerald and John can just bear with me for a second, because their questions 4 and 5 are coming up. But I'll just, before we come back to those, and we will come back to Australia, I think there's a sort of a natural lead in from discussions about sepsis to the question 6, which was the question about, are patients and carers entitled to ask for a second opinion from someone outside the team currently treating them? And that question is obviously prompted by the recent case of Martha Mills, which has had very high media coverage and which has had very extensive conversation in the clinical professions. And that was prompted by a case of sepsis that was not dealt with appropriately. So that's why I'm connecting it. So Ashley, could I just ask you to respond to that question? Ashley is our medical director. Over to you, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks for the question. So the question references a couple of different things. So Ryan's rule is something from Queensland in Australia, which relates to a fatal case of missed sepsis in a boy in 2007. And there it empowers a patient or carer to ask the lead nurse on a shift to obtain a second opinion. And if not satisfied, they can actually call a telephone number that's statewide and identify where the patient is, and then someone nationally will organise for someone to come and get a review. So that's in Australia. Martha Mills, as Mike's just recently outlined, is a recent tragic case at King's College Hospital in London with similar missed themes of sepsis with fatal consequences. And the government, I think, have recently announced that there will be something along the line of a Martha's rule, but they haven't yet given any formal details of that. So I just thought to set out what happens here in CUH. So and I'm going to restrict this purely to inpatients, which is where I think we're really focusing. So about a decade ago, maybe just under a decade ago, we invested a large amount of money in a rapid response team, which is a multidisciplinary team of doctors, nurses, based in intensive care, who have expertise in managing very sick patients. And that covers all of the adult patients in the hospital. And any team across the hospital, medical or nursing, can call on this team at any time, day or night, 365 days a year, to get an opinion on any patient across the hospital. So that's what's currently in place and been in place for a number of years. And I think that's what's played into a lot of the good outcomes that Sharon has already talked about. What they're currently looking at is a system where, even beyond that, could we enable patients who are and their carers who are unhappy with the care, who feel they're acutely unstable, to actually call that team to get a second opinion as to whether they're acutely unwell and need any different change in their acute management. Obviously, that team wouldn't be able to give an opinion as to whether or not on things like the timing of an operation or whether or not an operation should happen, but they'd be able to determine whether or not they were having missed sepsis. So I think those are the key things. It will be a very focused area. But broadly, yes, people are able to call for a second opinion. In the paediatric environment, it's slightly different because we have a smaller bed base and lots of smaller different teams, but essentially nurses within paediatrics are able to escalate concerns through the ward sister and the matron, who can then just ask the on-call paediatric team or maternity team to review the patients as appropriate. But so yes, we do have something in place. It's not quite what Ryan's rule would be in Australia, but we're well on the way to, I think, anything that would come through as a Martha's rule.
Thank you, Ashley. And of course, you can't eliminate the issues about personal interrelationships between professionals, which seem to have been a factor, at least in some cases, where not asking for another opinion. And again, I think we try and promote a culture of we are a team. We take advice, we take on board others, we seek others' views in the day-to-day care of our patients. I'm sure that some are better at that than others. That's inevitable, but I think that cultural point is also worth highlighting. But thanks ever so much, Ashley. Before I hand over to the question 4, which from Gerald, which I will come to, Gerald, in a second, while we're on the stream of patient safety questions, Lorraine, could I just ask you, you may have seen in the chat from Tricia, she observes how disruptive it can be to be inpatient at night and have your sleep disrupted by, for example, other patients on the ward who are in stress or anxiety. And also, she's then asking the question as to, do we specifically undertake kind of, communication to our nursing staff, especially to how to handle that and to try and talk quietly themselves. I often remark that being in hospital is not great if you don't feel very well, by which I mean we all are very much aware of the fact that a hospital environment is not stress-free, and that the sleep issue is one that I know does worry us. Lorraine, is there anything you want to say about Tricia's questions that are in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Roland alluded to in his presentation, actually, that certainly within our inpatient survey, the results of which we're just working through currently, yet again, we have seen that noise at night in particular is an area of concern for our patients. And there has been some work done on this previously with sleep well packs that give patients earplugs as an example, and work around bins closing quietly and encouraging staff to wear soft shoes, etc., to try and reduce the noise at night. We are in the process of reinvigorating that improvement group that was being led by our operational matron. We do try not to move patients at night. We try not to admit to wards at night, but as the hospital is busier and busier, we've talked about all the capacity issues earlier in the presentations, that can be incredibly challenging. But we are aware of these. It's a concern, and we are working on it. It's a real focus for us. There was also a question, Mike, that related to dementia patients and dementia patients being particularly disruptive. And again, this is an area of challenge for us, and we're doing lots of work around having the right environments for patients who are coming into us with dementia. We do everything that we can to try and prevent patients coming into us, because we know that that's really disruptive to patients who have dementia to come into a different environment. We have a new admiral nurse who is started in our emergency department, whose real focus will be on preventing patients with dementia being admitted to the hospital in the first place, unless they absolutely need to be here with us. And we've also just appointed a new dementia nurse who will be focusing again on training and working with our champions across the organisation to look at ways of working to support our staff and patients with dementia. It's an increasing challenge for us, and we will need to place patients in the most appropriate ward for them, but it certainly is an area that we're working on.
Thanks, Lorraine. And that point about, preventing, I think was the word you used, coming into the hospital as a dementia patient, is on the basis of dementia patient will need care, absolutely, and if hospital is the right place. But equally, if hospital is not necessary, then actually for a dementia patient, a hospital ward is a bewildering and frightening place for many with the condition. So but Tricia, I think your question is very well put, and it's something that we are very much aware of. So let me go back then to question 4, which was from Gerald, which is, I'll read it out. At Addenbrooke's, there is a culture of we know best. It is well known that suggestions to avoid the phenomenal waste of money and to implement more efficient procedures, etc., are simply ignored. Why is this, and what can be done to improve? Roland, do you want to initially respond?
Yeah, so Gerald, thanks very much for the question. And it would be really helpful to us if you could just drop in the chat or drop us an email letting us know any specific examples so we can follow those up. So what I'd say about change, and Sue, this is an area Sue Broster, a huge amount about, is there's quite a lot of change and development and improvement that happens in a way that's self-generated within the hospital. So an example I would use would be the way that we've moved from surgical procedures that mean that people need to stay in the hospital for several days to that care being provided in day surgery. And actually, that's something you as medical director have been very active in encouraging with our surgical colleagues. There's also some areas where we will go and be very proactive in looking outside of the organisation. So we've talked already about the elective orthopaedics centre. At the heart of those pathway changes there is the model that's been developed in Northumbria. So the team from Cambridge went to Northumbria, spent some time there, and that, if you like, is the benchmark to which we're aiming at. And then there's other areas where we've made change when we've seen people, if you like, stealing a march on us, getting ahead of us. And I would say, Sue, the work on virtual wards, Norfolk and Norwich, NNN, university hospitals was ahead of CUH, and we learned from them and implemented those changes. And those are terrific changes for patients and also for how we use the taxpayer pound. There are some areas of change and improvement and saving that we struggle on. We're not where we want to be on voice recognition software and use of that. But there are also areas where a lot of people come to us with what I would call solutions, looking for a problem that we don't have. And we will listen to those solutions, but if we don't think that they're valid, we will say no. Or we try to say no now with more purpose rather than keeping people hanging on. But always open for ideas, and if people want to send them through, we will look at them. Mike, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah,
but
thanks.
I'm very keen to hear from Gerald if there's anything specific we can follow up on.
Thanks, Roland. Yes, I mean, please do, Gerald. If there are, we're happy to have a conversation or an email from you as to examples. I mean, we do recognise the risk. I do recognise, as a chair of a big teaching hospital, I know that the reputation of the big teaching hospitals some time ago was very much that sort of the phrase that you've used. You could understand it as having some resonance in the way sometimes the big hospitals operated. But we do try to listen, learn. Daniel, you chair our audit committee. You chaired an oversight this morning of a discussion in regard to, for example, discharge practice, and the external auditors had, or the internal auditors rather, had done a report which was generally positive, but said there was a recognition by Nicola that there was something to learn from other hospitals where in aspects of discharge and use of digital in order to improve the flow of patients through the hospital. And Ian, who is the chair of our Addenbrooke's Futures Committee, in the terms of reference for the Addenbrooke's 3 Committee, is learn from other exemplars. So to try and bring that culture of learning from others in. I don't know if Daniel or Ian, is there anything you want to add to what's been said by Roland?
I think just to add from the discussion we had at the audit committee, I think the approach is very much about continuous improvement. I think for the trust, patient flow and patient access are a key part of the strategy for this period, and so actually looking at examples of progress elsewhere, taking advantage of modern tools like digitalization to manage patient flow and discharge. These are all things that we're open to and looking at actively with the objective of improving essentially patient access. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Ian, anything you want to add in terms of Addenbrooke's Futures?
I endorse what Roland and Daniel have said, but just add that the very fact that we now have a subcommittee, which is called Addenbrooke's Futures, which is all about looking to the future, making change, improving patient quality, using any new ideas from within and externally, demonstrates the ethos of the trust, and hopefully that Addenbrooke's Futures Committee will help us on that journey.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Daniel. But Gerald, please do give us something of that, because that'd be helpful, because it's we do recognise and the importance of dealing with that and thinking about it properly and thoroughly. So thank you, Gerald, for your question. Can I move on then to question 5, which is from John, which is we all know that the A&E department is tired, too small and understaffed, and that matters must get worse with the planned major expansion of housing in our catchment area. What is the situation with creating an expanded, better staffed department, and does the CQC report confirming the situation help us secure the required funding? Roland, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yes, so again, really good question. So just to sort of situate us, so the current department was built in the 1960s for 35,000 people and now sees 135,000 people. And that looks like quite a scary jump, and in fact it is. I think what we've been doing so far and what we will continue to do is to make different use of the capacity that sits around the existing emergency department, which are the floors that sit above it, and it's some of the outpatient capacity that sits around it. And what we're really looking to do is to use our existing emergency department for those people who are most seriously ill, and to direct and stream patients into other services provided by us for things like same-day emergency care, or what I would call urgent care that's not an emergency, and also to have different services for some of the patients who come to us who are very frail. So if you like, that's the core plan. And then alongside that, as we build the additional physical capacity, and I've talked about orthopedics, there's also the opening of 56 beds just before Christmas. It will be to make sure our inpatients are then spread across the rest of the hospital. In terms of a rebuilding of the emergency department, there is no government capital or revenue funding available, in our opinion, for that sort of development at the moment, which is part of the reason you're seeing such pressure on some of the big public infrastructure projects that you're hearing about through schools and some of the new hospitals that are or aren't being built. I think alongside that, there are some areas within the department where there is a case for additional staff, but there's also quite a strong case for better management of the department in itself. And the final thing I'd say is, I think the Care Quality Commission are a very helpful sense checker, sort of oil check of where the organisation is. but we should never view them as telling us what to do. We should always know the position and be clear with them, and then they're, if you like, giving us a kite mark as to where we sit. So I don't think the CQC will make any difference to that position. What will make a difference is a proper 10 to 15 year plan for public services of which the NHS is a part, and a capital and revenue settlement alongside that the country can afford, and that we can then plan around. So thanks, Mike. I'll hand back.
Thanks, Roland. Just to one supplement to that, and maybe slightly to anticipate what might have otherwise come up in response to Anthony Carpen's question 7, this issue of keeping tab with the increase in population perspectively, and how the hospital is able to grow accordingly and appropriately for that. This was a topic of discussion we had with Peter Freeman, who is the person who was nominated by Michael Gove as Secretary of State to look at the growth potential for Cambridge. And he spent some time with us in August. And that particular question about how does the hospital capacity relate to growth in population and growth in housing was his central question. And obviously we indicated the nature of there is no correlative funding that automatically follows through for population growth, but obviously the concerns that has in terms of the pressure on our infrastructure and the pressure on patient experience all the way through as a consequence. So that is very much centre to our debate with government on any ideas for growth in Cambridge, and we had extensive discussions with him and his team in the summer on that particular point. But that's a question to follow shortly. Just before I do that, throw in a slightly, I wasn't expecting to talk about socks tonight, but Fiona's put in a question in the chat, Lorraine, about picture 1 in the presentation that Roland had showed a patient's eternal conundrum. Do I take my socks off or do I leave them on? Lorraine, what's the practice?
I'm not sure I can answer that, Mike. I think it depends where you are and preference. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't keep socks on depending on what procedure you're having done. I think it would be very dependent on the area you are.
Okay, Fiona, what feels right to you and what feels right to circumstance, I think sounds a reasonable answer. So I hope that deals with that. So let's move on then to question. Just let me check if there's anything else in the run of these questions which was important for. No, I think let's deal with question 7. So, what assessments has the Trust made on the likely impact of staffing levels with the construction of both the cancer hospitals and the children's hospitals in Cambridge? And what conversations has the Trust had with local government, the combined authority, and with national government about housing solutions for key workers, transport solutions, in particular integrated transport that coordinates with changing shift times, and lifelong learning, in particular enabling adults looking to change career to move into healthcare and support professions? David, can I hand over to you for some of the elements of that? I mean, there are some of those which are kind of, so to speak, workforce elements, and Rohan, who chairs our workforce committee, may wish to supplement anything to that. And then we'll come on to how we're engaging with the local authorities in regard to these planning matters and transport matters. But David, housing and transport, I know, is a fundamental issue in all staff surveys, exit surveys, fundamental issue in terms of retention, and indeed on occasion a problem in terms of recruitment, because people say, I don't think I can afford to live there. So David, how as the workforce strategy, how does that feel?
I mean, thanks, Mike. The general issues, as you say, about the whole experience of our staff, not just the bit at work, but accessibility, how we have whole life in Cambridge in a high cost area, etc., etc. Part of the good work agenda that forms part of the workforce strategy, one of the 5 commitments that Roland talked about. The question specifically in the chat about accommodation, for example, is really important to us. It's important to us not just for new arrivals from overseas, although it's particularly important for that welcome is a good welcome into Cambridge, but it's important that people have the ability to move on from that initial stage accommodation if that's what they choose to engage with us. So the Good Work agenda has focused quite a lot on travel, transport, accommodation more generally. Specifically, things like accommodation officers. An accommodation officer has been appointed in the recruitment team, additional resource in Karen's team about securing accommodation and linking with partners to access accommodation in Cambridge and wider, and using that to build up a better baseline of what we've got available to us. So probably that's a long way to say it is absolutely in the workforce strategy. It is so important to our staff, and it's important we increasingly get that right and meet needs.
And that's absolutely helpful, David. And just prospectively, I mean, the Cancer Hospital and Children's Hospital, obviously there is no point building those hospitals if we can't resource them in clinical time, etc. Any particular issues? I mean, Lorraine, you have raised that. We're very much aware that risk is there, and we have to make sure that it doesn't manifest itself in reality. That's fundamental to our thinking throughout this, and there's a lot of work going on in regard to that. But of course, it depends on precisely when. We're still talking about a few years off before those will be in situ, so to speak. But David and Lorraine, anything you want to add about that particular aspect?
Well, I could just, we have a workforce planning process which looks in the immediate future, in the medium term, in the long term, with actions and investments associated with that. So the capacity which will be opening in next weeks and months has sort of come forward in our workforce plan. We have upped our engagement with the different staff supply pipelines, including domestically and internationally. And we expect that to happen with the new build hospitals as they become closer. So investing in the long-term pipeline as well as the short and medium term. So absolutely, we are working on the workforce plans associated with those.
Thanks very much,
we're
David.
not going to be taken by surprise by this. Yeah. We will build up a sustainable pipeline for that.
Okay, we've got about 12 minutes left for the rest of all your questions, so we'll try to keep it. Rohan, anything you want to add to that from the Workforce Committee? Because your assurance role in terms of seeking assurance that the workforce strategy is challenging, is appropriate, is trying to deliver. Your sense of that?
I think thanks, Mike. I think David's covered a lot of it. I mean, under the 5 ambitions, as David has said, we've got Good Work agenda as one of those, and there are 6 elements of that, 2 of which are around accommodation and travel and transport. And David's already mentioned that we're keeping track of what we can do in the immediate term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Even things like converting some of the existing office space to translate it into accommodation for staff, that's in our thinking and in process now. There are bits that are coming on stream through Waterbeach in terms of accommodation. So I won't add any more, but yes, we're keeping on top of it. It's pretty much an endless focus within Workforce and Education Committee, Mike.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to other things. So, but just Karen, I think I'm right in saying that we did surveys of housing needs. Anything you just want to say on the strategic housing needs?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, so we surveyed our staff and did a work with Savills, and we published that comprehensive housing needs analysis just prior to COVID, and it was shared very widely, and we've been sharing that with developers, with housing officers, and currently the integrated care system is undertaking an updated survey across the whole of the health economy. So once that comes forward, then we will reinvigorate those conversations. But we continue to have conversations with developers to look at opportunities to have accommodation that is discounted private rent that is affordable for our staff. And in the wider piece, Mike, you've already mentioned Peter Freeman, and so housing and accommodation is really key. And alongside that also is the transport corridors that open with the strategic transport infrastructure. So that's why Cambridge South and the East West Rail is really, really important as well. And then as a campus, we are looking at the master planning we are doing both on the existing campus that includes the Prologis land, into the local plan to really have a look at how might us as a campus and the wider ecosystem provide housing that will be suitable for our staff, affordable, and as Dave said, a mix of tenures, so that not only are we increasing our supply of the landing accommodation, people are able to make homes and have their families in and around Cambridge. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. And the only addition I'd make to that is that we have regular dialogue, Anthony, with the leaders of South Cambs, Cambridge City Council and the County Council and the combined, the Greater Cambridge Partnership, both at chief executive level and at the political leader level, and also with the planning team, as Karen has said. We clearly, the transport issues in regard to the Greater Cambridge Partnership, as everybody who lives in Cambridge knows, have been highly complicated and controversial over recent weeks in regard to congestion charging, and we've had a good debate with our colleagues in the Greater Cambridge Partnership about that, because we do recognise that congestion is a problem. So we'll continue that good discussion, though obviously that initial proposal seems no longer to be on the table. And there is some disappointment we have that the Haverhill route looks to be being abandoned for budgetary reasons, because that was important to our corridor of providing staff a good route into the campus. So it's an ongoing issue, but I think the relationships are solid. We talked already about Peter Freeman. Annabelle, if you're okay, if I take question 8 as at least partially answered, but obviously there's other opportunity in other fora to discuss that as well. So I'm going to go on to the question 9, which it's on the chat. I won't read it out because which is about how we relate to government. I mean, I'll just respond to that. You're right that big NHS foundation trusts are, the critical thing is, are we influencing the debate? And what I would say about that is that we do seek to have a good working relationship with our colleagues at NHS England, who are regular visitors and correspondents and people we speak to on that. We are politically connected in the sense of we are seen by senior politicians. We've had regular visits by government ministers, prime ministers, and opposition leaders. So again, I think we are trying to use our influence positively to shape the agenda. That doesn't mean that everything we try to secure happens. Of course, it's a complicated world, but I think our inputs to there are seen as important and indeed sought after. So we regularly are sought our opinion. There is the umbrella body of NHS providers, which likewise tries on behalf of all foundation trusts and providers to influence the agenda. And there are very particular areas. So, for example, Roland, our chief executive, was asked by NHS England to spearhead, so to speak, the whole national picture on how the NHS can better engage with the development of life sciences for the benefit of all. So I think we can say we are influencing, which doesn't necessarily mean that we always get what we want. So, but I think we do try to exercise that influence. I'm again going to go on to question 10, which again I'll take for read so you can read them on the chat, which is basically asking, please update on the cancer and children's hospitals. Where are we? Roland? And you've covered some of this in your presentation, but a bit more.
Yeah, so then just very briefly, so cancer outline business case approved, full business case we anticipate will be approved in a year's time. And then we would aim to start building late 2024 with a view to it being completed in 2027, and there's some flex around those dates. The big issue for us at the moment then is yes planning, yes mobilisation, yes how do we actually build to time and to cost, but it's making sure we make the progress we need to on the fundraising. Then on children's, as I said before, on Happy Friday this week, we'll be going to the Joint Investment Committee, trying to get the outline business case approved. We're not sure what the outcome of that will be. And then it would follow the timeline for that would follow a not dissimilar sort of trajectory, but probably, I'm going to say, sort of 12 months behind. And the big issue for us there is really not so much the fundraising, although we're making enormous progress and more to do. It's closing, if you like, the non-fundraising gap. Thanks, Mike. I'll hand back to you.
Okay, so thank you. And then can we go on to, I mean, you've raised, I think your issue about improving communication between various organisations involved in patients' care is well made. We are acutely aware of that. We know it's not perfect by a long shot. There are lots of instances of cases where we're improving that, but the need to make that a much more satisfactory experience of connected care. You mentioned ambulances. Actually, the ambulance relationship here, as Roland said earlier on, is actually relatively strong, but I take your point. So we wouldn't anyway want to say that we're where we would want to do that. Yes, there is scope to improve communication, and I think we're also trying to improve the complaints process. Your second question, we're very much aware of a backlog of complaints. We've made some structural changes to the complaints handling team to enable us both to address the backlog, but not to allow incoming complaints, which are current, to then get into the backlog, rather to deal with those more quickly. And we're also trying to make sure that that complaints process has a much more learning feel to it than a defensive feel to it, because I'm very much aware that complaints sent to big organisations can sometimes feel like it's an attempt to defend situations. So we are very much trying to make those changes, and we do recognise there has been an increase in complaints. Richard, you've raised a question about facilities in regard to will we be looking to nest patients RBH again in Royal Papworth again in the winter. We're extremely grateful for the fact we had 20 beds available to us in Papworth last winter. We're at the moment just going through the finalisation of our winter plan, so we'll know. I don't know the answer strictly now, but we were very grateful for the assistance of Papworth earlier. I think the other questions, I mean, there are a few other questions that we've not been able to address in the course of the meeting, and I recognise that we said we would finish at 6:30. We will come back to those and respond to you. I think we have all the relevant details, Namu, to be able to respond to unanswered questions that are on the chat. I'm just looking for Namu to confirm that, maybe thumbs up or whatever, just to say, yes, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those questions that colleagues or members of the public you've not had an answer to, now we will provide an answer to you those outside of the meeting. And so I'll just deal with the final pre-submitted question, which was again from Annabelle. What progress is CUH making with the 100 million maintenance backlog? Karen, do you want to just deal with that?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so there's a national methodology to establish backlog, and that requires us to every 5 years do a very detailed piece of work, and the intervening years do a desktop study. So our last in-depth study was in 2019. So in 2024 we will be doing that. So over the last year, we have invested about £65 million in critical infrastructure, backlog maintenance, and fire safety work. So that's quite an investment. But despite that, our estate continued to deteriorate. It continues to age. So our backlog, total investment to reduce backlog, is not unsurprisingly increasing each year. But I hope that gives an indication of the level of investment across the 100 million, and reporting for this year continues to be in that region.
Thanks, Karen. That's very helpful. Thank you. So, colleagues, I'm going to draw an end now, if that's okay. But I recognise that there are, as I say, there are those outstanding questions or even partially answered questions. I'm conscious that in the complaints you made a point about how that links to ICSs, which I didn't address. So we'll come back to colleagues separately, and because this is a public meeting, we'll make sure those answers are put up on the web page as well, so that those who didn't ask the question but saw the question and are interested in the answer will make sure that those answers are available publicly. So it only calls for me at 6:30 to thank you as members of the public for attending today, and I'll hand over to Namu in a second, to thank you as members of the public for joining us today and for your continued interest. It does, as I said earlier, really matter to us, because it's through that we continue to have stimulus to improve and also to understand what it's like being a patient or a member of the public dependent on Addenbrooke's, something we take very seriously. So thank you for your time and for your continued interest. And thank you to all my colleagues from the board for your answers and assistance in the conversation, and to Neil as lead governor, both for today, but for your role as lead governor throughout. Namu's got a hand up. I think it's going to be about a survey, but I'll hand over to Namu.
That's correct. Thank you so much, Mike. Please could I ask our attendees to complete our short survey? I'll insert the link in the chat box in a second. So we'd just like to get your feedback on today's meeting. Thank you very much.
And I think I'm right in saying, Namu, that the link you put does not require you to do that straight away. You can do it at your leisure, but again, it helps us in framing the way in which the annual meetings operate. So, colleagues, thank you to everybody. Thank you for your time. And Namu, have you put the link up? So
yes, I've put
the link is there.
In
so hopefully you will have that. So that you can give a response. So thank you to everybody, and look forward to seeing everybody as appropriate next year at the annual public meeting, and again to other colleagues more quickly. So thank you.